Hi everyone, I'm Riley from Echidna Sewing. Welcome back, and in this video I'm going to show you how to make these satin eye masks. These eye masks are super easy to make and they're a great introduction into using slippery fabrics. They make great gifts and they're super comfortable on your eyes while you're sleeping. Here is everything that you're going to need for this project, but if you want the full list you can check out down below. Now let's get into it. The first thing we're going to do is cut two rectangles that are 10 inches by 5 inches out of your satin fabric and your interfacing. Grabbing my ruler and my friction pen, I'm just going to mark out my rectangle. And just be careful when you're marking and cutting your fabric. Now we are working with satin, so it's slippery and it won't stay in the exact same place while you're marking it. Right. You can go ahead and cut that one out. All right, once you have that one, do the same for the other three pieces. Once you've got your pieces cut out, the next step is to fuse the interfacing to the wrong side of our fabric. I've already done this one here and I'm just going to go ahead and do this one now. Alright, there are our two pieces with our interfacing fused onto them. Next you just want to go ahead and cut out your mask piece. Then with your friction pen, just trace out your mask pattern piece onto each one of your satin pieces. And when I'm tracing these, I like to do it on the back, so on the interfacing side, rather than on the satin side. All right, just like that, and go ahead and cut that one out. There's one piece, go ahead and do that for the other one. Once you have those two pieces, just set them aside for now and grab your wadding or your batting. And you're just going to do the exact same thing and cut out one more piece of your eye mask pattern. Once you've cut that one out, set it aside as well, and we're going to work on the band portion right now. So grab your elastic and you're just going to measure out how much elastic you need. And you can do this by measuring from one side of your eye, around the back of your head, to the other side of your eye. So that is my elastic there, pretty much perfect. You'll need to cut a band from your satin that is twice as long and twice as wide as your elastic here, and then add 3/4 of an inch onto the width for your seam allowance. My elastic here is about 16 inches long and it's about 3/4 of an inch wide. So that's going to make my satin band 32 inches long and about 1.5 inches wide, and then add 3/4 of an inch on for seam allowance. Just because my satin's a bit uneven on the edge here, I'm just going to straighten up this edge before I cut out my band. Then with my ruler and my friction pen, I'm going to mark out my measurements for my band. And then cut your band piece out. Once you have your band piece cut, I'm going to fold that in half lengthways with right sides together and pin or clip that raw edge to secure it. Once you've done that, we can move on to sewing. Before I start sewing, I've just switched over from my standard zigzag foot to my 1/4 inch foot, as all of my seam allowances that I'm going to sew are going to be 1/4 inch. If you don't have a 1/4 inch foot, you can just follow the 1/4 inch mark on the back of your needle plate. And don't forget to back stitch at the start. Back tack at the end as well. Once that is sewn, cut off your excess threads. And I'm just going to use my loop turner to turn this right side out. After you've turned that right side out, go ahead and give it a quick press with your iron. Be careful when you're ironing satin that your iron isn't on too high of a temperature, otherwise you could melt the satin. And once that is nice and flat, we're going to grab your elastic and a safety pin and attach one end of the elastic to your safety pin, and we're just going to feed the safety pin and the elastic through your band. Once the elastic is just inside the end of the band, I'm just going to pin that shut, and I'm going to sew them together with about an 1/8 seam allowance, just to hold the elastic to the end of the band. Right, take that pin out, and I'm just going to continue feeding the elastic through to the other side. Once you've gotten to the other side, I'm just going to do the exact same thing to this end as I did on the other end. So I'm going to pin it closed and sew that elastic to the band with an 1/8 seam allowance. And then I just like to give my band a bit of a stretch so that it evenly distributes all of those ruffles. You can set that one aside for now and grab your wadding and one piece of your satin, and I'm going to pin those together on the wrong side of the satin here. When I'm pinning with satin especially, I like to put my pins in horizontally rather than vertically, as I find it's a lot easier to pull out when it gets to the pin. Alright, once you've pinned those two together, I'm just going to sew them together with a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around. When I'm sewing these edges here, I find it a bit easier to pop my needle into my fabric, lift my presser foot up, and just move my fabric slightly as I maneuver around these corners. Trim off your excess threads, and then flip that one so you've got the right side facing up. Grab your band, and I'm just going to align my band on the edge of my mask here. And I'm going to pin that in place and do the same on the other side, making sure that they're even on both sides. Right. Now I'm just going to sew them down again with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Just going to trim up these edges here, just slightly. All right. Before we attach our last piece on, I'm actually just going to pin the band to the center of the mask so that it doesn't move around or get caught under the presser foot while we're sewing. Once I pin that one down, I'm going to put my other piece of my mask right sides together on top, and I'm going to pin that to secure it together. Before we sew that last bit together, I'm just going to take my friction pen and I'm just going to mark out a 2-inch gap at the top of my mask here that I'm going to leave open so that I can turn the mask right side out. All right, now you're going to sew around the perimeter of this mask using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Don't forget to back tack at the start. When you come to sewing over the bands, if you find that it's a little bit thick, you can just use your purple thing just to push your fabric under. When I get to this curve up here where the nose will sit, before I put my needle in my fabric and turn for the corner, I'm just going to back tack just a couple stitches just to reinforce that area. All right, and as I'm approaching that other marker, I'm just going to back tack to finish. Cut off your excess threads. The last thing we're going to do before we turn this right side out is we're just going to clip some notches in the 4 corners of our mask. That's going to reduce the bulk when we turn it right side out. So I'm going to start down the bottom and I'm going to clip just some triangles, but be careful not to snip your actual stitching. So for down on this bottom curve, I normally do about 5 or 6 triangles, like so. And then up on this top one, I'll do about 3 or 4. All right, should look a little something like that, and I'm just going to do that on the other side. Once you've notched those 4 corners, the next thing you're going to do is just trim down this seam allowance at the nose here, again just to reduce bulk. Just like so. And then I'm just going to remove these pins that we put into the band so that we don't stab ourselves with them when we turn this right side out. Okay. Now you can turn your mask right side out. And I'm going to use my purple thing just to push out these curves. Make sure they're sitting nice and flat. I'm just going to tuck in the turning hole up at the top. And I'm going to iron that flat. And just pop a pin in it for now. And I'm just going to iron down the rest of these seams so that they're nice and flat. Our last step is to just sew some top stitching around the entire perimeter of this mask, making sure that we sew the turning hole shut as well. I'm just going to increase my stitch length to 3 millimeters when I do a top stitch. And I'm going to top stitch about 1/8 of an inch from the edge. When I get to these curves, I'm going to use the same method as I did before of popping my needle down, lifting my presser foot up and just shifting my fabric slightly and again to just get a nice smooth curve. Then when you get to the nose point, pop your needle in, lift your presser foot up and pivot your fabric and continue. Don't forget to back stitch at the end. You can trim off your excess threads. There is your finished satin eye mask. Now if you wanted to add embroidery to it, like I've done here, you'll need to do so at the very beginning before you cut out the mask pattern pieces. And if you're interested in any of the products that we use in this video today, check out our website for more information. And don't forget to tag us on Instagram so we can see your creations too. Thanks for watching, happy sewing!